Hey Harmonizers, welcome to the first Mustang session. These are brand new Mustangs that have just arrived, and we are going to get started with doing a little session with them. And these are all Mustangs that were rounded up by the Bureau of Land Management. We've got 3 horses from Nevada and 1 from Oregon. There's 1 horse in here that is 3 years old, and there's 1 that is 9 years old. I want to see in the comments if you guys can guess which one is which, because the older the horse, typically the harder they are to tame and gentle, and the younger they are, typically the easier they are, simply because if the older they are, the longer they've been wild and the longer they've kind of gotten to be on their own and not depend on people. The younger they are, the more familiar they are with people, because the way it works is they get rounded up out in the wild, but then they are brought to holding facilities, and at the holding facilities they do get food and they do get water and they do see people moving around on the outside of the pens, and they do get sorted on the inside of the pens sometimes, so they do get to see people a little bit. Unfortunately, it's not always the best of circumstances. They're used to seeing people and get chased into pens or chased into sorting, and then they get things like being dewormed and getting their blood taken so that way they can be tested for health diseases, or they get their hooves trimmed, or they get branded. So all types of things that are for their health and for their benefit and for their safety and well-being, but they don't understand that. They just know that it is not very fun to have a person around. So what I like to do as part of my taming process is teach horses to have a new positive association with people. And that means good experiences with people. And so what I have is grass in my hand, and you can see that the horses do have a round bale and they have access to that hay 24/7 to be able to go and eat. And to start with, they are all together, and I'm just going to be bringing them grass essentially, and trying to show them that when I approach, I'm just bringing grass to them, and I leave that grass and then I allow them to eat that grass. For the first session, I don't expect them to eat grass out of my hand, especially when they are all together like this. So when Mustangs are all together like this, the one that is the most nervous will actually just feed off more negative nervous energy to the other horses, and then because the horses have mirror receptors and they mimic each other, they'll all just kind of run around and be scared, even if they wouldn't have been if they were on their own. So one of the first things that we will be doing to help speed along their process is we'll be dividing this pen into 4 little separate sections, so that way they each have their own section to be gentled in without needing to worry about the other horses running away. Also, just from a safety perspective, it's a little bit better if you have kind of your private space, so that we don't have to worry about another horse maybe spooking and running over you. Sometimes people think, oh, like, why aren't you in there with a pen or a whip or a flag or something? And the reason is, usually the horses, they're just so scared of you that I don't need anything like that. And I also don't need them thinking that I'm there to try and make them run or make them get sorted, which is typically what their interaction with people has been before. If somebody's been in the pen, it's because they've had to be pushed from one pen to another or something like that. So I will simply just be approaching them, offering grass and tossing grass down, and then when you see me back out of the screen, that is to allow the horses time to investigate that grass and see if they want to eat that grass. And you can see they're all pretty nervous, and when I'm doing stuff like this, I'm also kind of assessing, what are these horses like? What are their personalities? Do some of them seem more skittish than others? Are some of them presenting their left side, or are they presenting their right side? Sometimes horses prefer that you approach them on the left side, but sometimes they prefer you approach them on the right side. It can be kind of different. And there you can see the horses as they run around. I'm looking at, okay, so who is leading the herd, so to speak? Who is turning to look at me? Who is closest when they are looking at me? Who's hiding in the back? And these types of things let me learn more about their specific behavior and what they're going to be like for gentling and training. Of course, once they are in their own private pens, you can't kind of assess them in the same kind of way. You still can a little bit based on if they face you or not face you and things like that. But the group environment is a good chance to kind of see how they're interacting in the herd. Are they high energy? Are they low energy? Are they just feeding off of the other horses? Or are they actually high energy? So you can see here they're looking at me, and if you watch closely, you'll see that there's one horse that tends to really hide in the back more so than the others, and is a little bit more flighty in the others. And what will be interesting is to see if that horse continues to be like that, or as they realize that humans are kind, will we actually see a more confident side of them come out, and maybe they aren't as skittish as they first appear. They just haven't had the best experience with people yet and don't see the need to interact with us. So here you can see I've got a few of the horses lined up looking at me, but you can see it's that black horse that is really keen to hide. And the chestnut one actually appears to be the most bold and is coming up to me, which sometimes you might think, oh, like that's a really good thing. That horse is going to be the easiest one. Not necessarily, because when they are bold like that, sometimes they can try to be challenging and exert their dominance over you. Like they can be curious or brave to the point that they then want to dominate that thing. And I don't want them to dominate me or kick me or bite me. And then that means setting boundaries, which can then scare them a little bit, and you can end up in this little bit of a cycle. So we'll have to see what happens with that chestnut and how we progress forward, and we'll see how that goes. Usually my favorite horse, if I'm looking at the Mustangs and I'm trying to choose, which one, if I could choose out of my pick, I would prefer to take the one that seems to be in a more thinking frame of mind and less reactive, the one that watches me a little bit more carefully, and even if they're scared and they're running away, that seems to be thinking about how they do that. Because if the horse is thinking, then I'm going to be able to work with them and train them. And if they're not thinking, then they're not even going to be listening to me. They're not even going to even sort of tune into me. So here's a different perspective now. I'll show you from me holding the camera behind the grass, and you can see the horses all really well here. You can see who's in the front, who's hiding in the back, who's facing me. You can also see that they presented different sides. That bay mare on the left is kind of giving me more of the right eye. The right eye is the one that you can see. Some of the other horses are coming straight on, or the little black mare is also kind of giving me more the right side. A lot of times people just assume that the horse is going to prefer you to be on their left, but that isn't actually the case. And so by doing this, the horse gets to show me which side of their body they are more comfortable on, and then I can use that information to help me train them by starting with what's easier for them and then progressing to what is more difficult. So this little chestnut here is getting pretty curious and comes pretty close here, considering this is my first time in the pen with them. And the only reason why she has a halter on already is because that was put on in the chute. So when they get picked up from the holding facility, sometimes there is the option to put halters on. The way we were putting these horses into the trailer, there are 2 chutes, and we were able to put the halters on the first 2 horses in the chute, but then the last 2 horses kind of had to just, run on, so we weren't able to do halters on the last 2, but just the first 2 that were running through the pens. So that's why 2 horses have halters on and 2 do not. And so I've just sped up the footage here just so you can get an idea of how patient I was. I'm just kind of standing there, and the horses are kind of moving around, a little bit unsure, and all I'm kind of waiting for is them to all kind of look at me or seem curious about me. And when they seem to make a bit of an approach, that's when I'll drop that grass. And you can see I had gotten a little too close, and then that kind of scared them. They all got running around, and that's a little intimidating. And once their adrenaline spikes like that and they get running, then they get more flighty. So it's always better if you can avoid the whole running thing, because once they start running, they just kind of get really silly with their energy and their anxiousness and their nerves, and they just get in that flight mode. So now they're all kind of moving around a lot more than they were, because as soon as you kind of spark that, things get a little bit worse. And so you can see there are lots of running around, different horses running around there. And then once they start to settle up, and are looking at me a little bit more, then I'll toss that grass and I'll back up and allow them an opportunity. And you can see the black horse definitely trying to hide in the back and stay out of view. And it's looking like some of the other horses are actually doing better there. So you can see I toss that grass and then I step out of the way to allow them to get curious and to eat that grass. And in the beginning, I have to walk almost to the total opposite end of the pen and get completely out of their space to be able to do that. And as they gain more confidence, I won't have to back up as far. They'll be able to eat that grass with me a little bit closer and then a little bit closer and a little bit closer until eventually we'll feed by hand. It's nice in the summertime because we can pick fresh grass and have that as a nice treat. But in the wintertime, we can just use some nice green alfalfa hay. Sometimes the square bale alfalfa hay is nicer than the actual round bale hay, and that can add a little bit of a reward. When they're wild Mustangs, they don't know what grain is, and they don't eat grain, which can be a little bit hard because it'd be so much easier if they could just take some little pieces of kibble than having to go and pick a bucket of grass before I go in for training. So it's definitely a lot harder in that sense, but it does make a big difference for sure. And you can see the little black horse is totally hiding. It's like, no, you don't exist back there. And when I back up, she's able to put her head forward and look at me a little bit. So it's interesting to see how the horses are lined up and to see how they're doing as a group here. And then we will be dividing them up to make that training a little bit safer for sure. And you can see I'm backing up quite a ways at a distance here. And once I get far enough away, then they start to get curious and want to go forward and see that it's grass. And the more times that I repeat this process of go forward, you look at me, I toss some grass, you get to eat grass, they'll start facing up a lot sooner because they'll realize that something good is going to happen afterwards. And then they're also seeing that I bring grass and grass is yummy, and so that's a pretty good deal. So starting to create those positive associations of, oh, I see that human, maybe I'm going to get some of that grass again today. Rather than, oh no, I see that human, maybe I'm going to get pushed into the chute again and they're gonna stab me in my neck and get more blood or whatever it is that they've experienced in the past. So this is just a nice way to start off on a much better footing. You can see some of them are eating the grass and some of them are not, but is that going to affect how they are for training? You'll have to watch to find out and see how things go, but comment and let me know which one you think is the 3-year-old and which one you think is the 9-year-old. And we've got a chestnut, black, and 2 bays, one with the star and one with blaze.